Hi everyone, this is Jared Friedland. I'm going to be walking you through the teacher edition of our SAT Bootcamp curriculum. I'm going to be starting here with chapters 1 and 2. And throughout this video teacher edition, I'm going to be modeling how I would recommend that you teach the course. And then I'm also going to be sharing with you a lot of strategies and techniques and tips that I've accumulated over the years, that some of our most veteran instructors have voiced about really good ways to go about teaching the boot camp. And you'll see here, for those of you who are brand new, that what we have, your teacher edition is identical to the student edition, to the textbook or bootcamp book that all of your students will be receiving. The only difference is, and it says this on this page, is that the teacher edition has these gray boxes that have this white writing enclosed in them. And you'll see that we've given you a few symbols here. So first of all, just to walk you through this, if we give you the light at the end of the tunnel symbol, that's a symbol that lets you know that the energy in the room might be starting to just dip a tiny bit, and you want to try to buoy that energy. Then we have this gentleman here, a particularly, as it says here, befuddled looking Keanu Reeves. And you're going to see that icon throughout the teacher's edition whenever you're on a problem where a lot of students might tend to get stumped. Then we have the Verrazano Bridge for my fellow East Coasters here. Uh, Probably not one of the most beautiful bridges on the East Coast, but a very useful one. And analogously, you're going to see this symbol quite a bit throughout the teacher's edition, and you'll see this symbol whenever you want to segue from one activity to another. And I'll tell you again, I'm going to be adding a lot of pro tips, as many as I can throughout these training videos. One thing that I can't emphasize enough is that you want your teaching to be as seamless as possible. You're going to be going pretty fast, and you're going to be covering a tremendous amount of material. And even though the material is grouped logically, so for example, with the writing and language chapter, you'll see that we've grouped the grammar questions together, we've grouped the rhetoric questions together, data, and so forth. Even though there's a logic to the grouping, you still don't want it to seem jarring when you're going from one concept to another. So you'll notice that throughout this book, there's a lot of pages whose sole purpose is to serve as ligament to really get you again from one idea to the next without the lesson seeming in any way disjointed or disconnected. And then finally, so here's our Verrazano, and then finally here we have a nice icon of the pop band from the 1980s. I was about to say the British pop band, but I think that they're actually Dutch or Scandinavian. Anyway, and as I'm saying this, it also occurs to me that many of you who are listening to this probably were not born in the 1980s, which is making me feel very, very old here. So in any event, here we have the British or the let's just say the European pop band Aha. Some great synthesizer music from the 1980s. Why do we have them here? In addition to the fact that their hairstyles provide some nice entertainment value, we also have them because we want your students to have a lot of aha moments, those light bulb moments. And there's a lot of them sprinkled throughout this book. So we want you to understand when your students are likely to have that idea turned on, to really start finally grasping a concept that they might have thought of as really daunting or challenging beforehand. And that's certainly one of the more important goals of teaching the boot camp. So before we actually dive into this teacher edition and get into the strategies which are laid out here, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about logistics here. So you'll notice here that the first page, other than that introduction page that I just showed you, the first page that has any real directions for you is page 5. And you'll notice that it says 9 a.m. It's really critical that you begin teaching at 9 a.m. sharp, particularly for those of you who haven't taught a boot camp for us before. I can tell you the hardest thing, the most challenging thing about teaching a boot camp far and away is really the pacing. There's a lot of material to cover. We want it to be as comprehensive as possible given the time constraints. And since we want it to be as comprehensive as possible, we've put as much information in this boot camp as we can. So you can pretty much rest assured that you're not going to run out of content and strategies to teach. If anything, you might start getting a little bit pressed for time. But one of the best ways that you can anticipate that and decrease the likelihood that you're going to start having to play catch up is by starting again at 9 a.m. sharp. And one of the best ways that you can position yourself for beginning at 9 a.m. sharp is to make sure that you arrive at your site no later than 8:30 in the morning. By the way, I'm assuming almost all of our classes, we do classes in California and Texas and throughout the Eastern Seaboard. Almost all of our classes go from 9 a.m. till 1 p.m., both on Saturday and Sunday. But at some schools, due to religious reasons or time commitments or extracurriculars, some schools, about 10% of our schools, will do boot camps from 1 to 5 p.m., or they'll do them on consecutive Saturdays, or even on rare occasion during the week. So, obviously, if you're teaching a boot camp that goes from 1 to 5 p.m., you can just adjust the time accordingly. Having said that, though, again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting to your site by 8:30 in the morning. And it's not only important because we want to make sure that you're there on time, but it'll actually help to get you relaxed. I've taught a lot of these boot camps. I try to teach about one of them per year still, and it's almost akin to arriving at like an airport or something like that, where if you get there nice and early, you can relax, you can set everything up, you don't have to rush. As students start trickling in, you can learn their names. Also, you might well have a school member on the site. That school member might be a PTA mom or a PTA dad, might be a guidance counselor, might be the principal or assistant principal. Needless to say, you want to greet those people professionally and courteously. You're not only representing us, you're also representing yourselves. And you want to just welcome everyone to the boot camp. You can start passing out materials. Each of you will have a roster for the boot camp. So you can start checking students in because, a big part of, I think, what makes us successful is that we approach this exam and we approach concepts in math and in language arts very, very differently from what students are used to, what they're accustomed to in school. And I think that's one of the many factors that's enabled us to be successful. And the reason I bring that up is, when you're interacting for the first time with your students and you're greeting them as they're walking in, you want to establish that friendly rapport with them. It's that mentor-mentee relationship rather than like a teacher-student relationship. So it's just a little bit more casual. At the same time, it's still professional. But while a teacher at school would be Mr. Friedland, if you're teaching a boot camp, you want to go by your first name. In one of the other videos for this teacher edition, this video syllabus, we're going to do about a 20-minute section on do's and don'ts, and I'm going to dive a lot more deeply into how you should comport yourself and dealing with faculty members, etc. But for now, again, I just want to emphasize: get there early, start warmly and greeting any students or faculty members who may be there. Start checking people off. You can hand out materials, and also you can start arranging the tables. We don't actually control the room that you're in. And part of the reason, at some schools, we don't actually find out until the last minute what classroom you're going to be in because we're taking enrollments usually till Wednesday or Thursday up until the actual boot camp. So because of that, if the boot camp attendance skyrockets in the last couple of days, a lot of schools will move us from, say, a classroom into a library. The relevance for you guys is that if you are in a library type setting, you always want to make sure that all of the chairs and the tables are facing you. Because I can tell you from personal experience, learning it the hard way, that if you don't have all the tables and chairs facing you and set it up that way, once students have sat down and they're facing themselves or even have their backs turned to you, it's really, really hard to get them to turn around at that point. It requires a lot more heavy lifting. So again, you want all eyes on you during the course of the boot camp. So, and anyway, once you really dive in, you want to call people's attention, as it says here, at 9 a.m. Sometimes, and listen, there's some classes that I've taught and a lot of other people have taught, and we've been doing this for close to a decade now, where you've got kids who are really silent. You've got some classes where the kids, I would say rambunctious is too strong of a word, but they're being pretty talkative. Maybe they're moving about, especially if they haven't seen one of their friends in a while who happens to be in the class. So it for some of you, if you're in a classroom where you want to get kids to quiet down because you're about to start, you can just call their attention by saying something to the effect of, "Hey guys, come on, we're going to get going now. I want to make sure that we start on time. So let's all face forward and we're going to begin today's session." So just something to that effect that just really calls students' attention. As it says here, on this page, if you want, you can say something like, "Shh, the movie is about to begin." That's a little bit cheesy, but honestly, it works really, really well on students. They kind of get that, okay, things are going to begin. I have to get off my cell phone and start paying attention. Um, and then you want to introduce yourself before you do anything else. As it says here in the teacher edition, you want to keep your introductions short and sweet, okay? Really just like, if 45 seconds, not even 1 minute, just, who you are, a couple of little tidbits that are likely to endear you to students and start building that rapport. And, it's maybe where you went to college, if you played a sport, where you grew up, if you grew up near them, anything that would start, again, really kindling a bond between you and your students. And we'll go into this in further detail in the do's and don'ts video, but I'll say it here now anyway. Obviously what you don't want to do is you don't want to treat this as like a therapy session or start doing, too much information for your students. I wish this weren't the case, but we've had instructors in the past who truly have treated it like a therapy session, and needless to say, that wasn't good. They'll start saying, well, I went to Swarthmore for a year, and then I got really depressed, and I left home, and I traveled around and kind of found myself for a year, and then I transferred to Brown. So needless to say, you don't want to do that, okay? You want to keep it short and sweet. Now, if you've attended one of our live trainings, and I know that a lot of you have attended one of our training sessions in San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York or Austin and up and down the Eastern Seaboard. So if you've attended one of our live sessions, what you've probably heard us say over and over again, and possibly perplexingly, is that you shouldn't share your SAT score for when you were in high school. And the reason is that it's kind of you're kind of damned either way. If you scored a 1600 on the old test or a 2400 on the 2400 point version of the SAT, then students might look at you as someone who's a brainiac and you might be really unrelatable. And conversely, if you, my gosh, barely got like a 1590 or a 2380, then some students wrongly might be judging you and saying, well, how am I supposed to learn from this person? She only got a 2380 on the SAT, which obviously is a pretty ludicrous notion, but I can tell you that that is what many students will think. So if students, on the off chance that they do ask you what you got when you took the SAT, I would just smile and I would flip that script on them and say, I promise you I did really, really well. But this weekend, I'm here to coach all of you guys and maximize your scores. And that's what really matters to me is making sure that you guys are poised to do your very best. And you can even elaborate on that. And you can tell your students, and I really do believe this, you can say to them, listen, some of you might be wondering, what's a good score on the SAT? And we get that question all the time. And I'll tell you, don't worry about what your friends might think is a good score, or maybe someone a teacher or something like that. Here's what a good score is on the SAT. A good score is a score that will make you competitive for the colleges that you're targeting. That's really all that should matter. So a good score, again, is a score that's at the bare minimum an above average score for students who are admitted rather, to the colleges that you want to apply to, a score that will make you a viable contender. And to me, that is the most honest answer that we can give students. So in case you get that question, which is pretty common, that to me is the way to handle it. A few other little ground rules here before we dive in. And again, this will also be in the do's and don'ts video. You also, there's one like verboten phrase, one forbidden phrase throughout the weekend, which is you never, never, never want to say, I don't know. I wish that weren't the case, but again, you have to put yourself in sort of the psychological mindset of the students who are in the room with you. A lot of them, candidly, aren't dying to be there. And who can blame them? They're sitting there right now, it's Saturday morning, and this is an SAT prep class. And even though it's going to be a whole lot more enjoyable, and it will be, than they ever anticipated, it's still 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So the reason I bring that up is if you start saying I don't know, or seeming like someone who is in any way ill prepared to teach, they're going to go home and probably tell their parents that, and because they're essentially, some of them, not all of them, but enough of them will be eager to go home and say, well, you maybe sit in this SAT prep class and the teacher just kept saying I don't know how to do this. So there are ways around that. I know, again, that a lot of you are teaching for the first time. By the way, one other thing is, you never, never, ever want to say that this is your first time teaching. It is the only little white lie we will ever ask you to tell. And there's a very, very important reason for this, which is that if you were to reveal this is your first time teaching an SAT bootcamp, you're going to lose tremendous legitimacy. Again, those of you who've been through live trainings might have heard me say this, and it's true. I was once on a plane. This was a couple years ago. I fly quite a bit for Catalyst. I was on a plane, I was on a flight, and we had just landed. And the captain got on and over the PA system and said something like, can I have a round of applause and congratulations for First Officer such and such? This was his first landing. I turned the control over to him. Can I have a round of applause? And I remember really vividly, there was this like tremendous enthusiastic, people were like almost like a standing ovation type of level of applause. And I remember thinking to myself on the airplane, they're not applauding to congratulate this dude. This exuberant applause is stems from the fact that the captain, thankfully, mercifully, did not tell us that he was handing over the reins to someone whose first time it was at 37,000 feet. He waited till we were on terra firma. So obviously the stakes when you're teaching a boot camp are both figuratively and literally a lot lower. But nonetheless, you don't want your students to think that this is your first time. So, please don't mention that. And they won't ask you, by the way. So it should be really easy. But going back to the I don't know, if your students, and again, this is really directed at those of you for whom this is your first boot camp, if you are asked something and you don't know the answer, you can use a couple of easy tricks. The best way to handle that is to say something to the effect of, that's a really great question. I promise I'm going to get to that just a little bit later. I want to make sure that we are on track to wrap up by 1 p.m. And I'm going to try to get to that, though, in just a little bit, and then you can just move on. Because the thing is, if you truly don't know an answer to a question, and you answer with that, and that's your response, the good news is that student who posed the question will understand. If he or she keeps pressing for information, that's going to delay the release of the class. And if it delays the release of the class, that student is going to be incurring the ire of all of his or her classmates, and that student will pay a big social penalty. So thankfully, that sort of, given obviously recent political climate, I hate to use this term, but that's sort of your trump card, if you will, to get out of any sort of situations where a student asks you a question and you just get a little bit flustered. Okay? So again, it's 9 a.m. You've introduced yourself. And what you're really going to be doing here is you're going to be skipping over all of this introductory chapter. This is stuff that they can read, on their own if they want to look through these 1,000 things they'd probably rather do than prep for the SAT this weekend, which incidentally is something that we worked on for, I don't know, a couple of hours, then kind of waved the white flag. So if you're someone who wants to bust out a magnifying glass, what you'll see is that we've cheated on this a little bit and probably listed about 300 things and then started cycling them again. But during the next edition of this bootcamp manual, we'll probably have 1,000 things actually written down here, most of which are rather torturous. So again, all of this students can just read on their own. You're just going to skip it. By the way, and this is a lot of this, by the way, is just sort of this like onion-like faux history of the SAT. By the way, when you're skipping things, and there will be pages you're going to skip throughout your teaching, you're not going to say necessarily, let's skip the next 20 pages or skip this page. Because remember, you've got to always think about the psychological makeup of the students who are in this class. They're teenagers. And if you tell a teenager not to do something or not to look at something, well, guess what? They're then going to be a whole lot more interested in looking at it. So rather than saying something like, let's skip chapter 1 and go to chapter 2, you can just say, so guys, flip with me. Let's go directly to chapter 2. That way I'm not telling them to skip over stuff. But anyway, they can look at this on their own. This is, I think, a pretty entertaining build up to the SAT. It talks a lot about the genesis of the redesigned SAT, a euphemism if ever there was one. So really the in earnest beginning to your boot camp is really here at chapter 2. And at this point, it should really be about 9:05 in the morning. Okay, and at this point, you should have warmed students up. You can ask them a couple of icebreaker questions, by the way. After you introduce yourself, you can post some questions, like how many of you guys are seniors, how many of you are juniors, and you can have them raise their hands. There's something about just the physical act of getting them to start moving and raising their hands and responding to questions that really, again, starts elevating the energy in the room, which is what you want to do. By the way, throughout this training video, we're doing something different this time. I taught a boot camp about a month ago in Texas at a small private school called San Marcos Academy. And I taught it for about 15 students, and we filmed it. We got permission from the school, and a lot of faculty members were actually watching me and watching the students, I might add. And I'll be honest with you guys, it was a tough boot camp to teach. I've taught a lot of these, and it was challenging because, well, foremost because the faculty were sitting in. And so the students couldn't really cut loose too much because, especially with the setup of the classroom, as you'll see, because we're going to be splicing in footage, the students were sitting in kind of like a U formation. Again, there was a small class, only about 15 students. And then the faculty members were also in kind of a U position in chairs, but they were facing them, almost like a dissertation committee. And I was actually right in the middle. So I was almost like the sort of like the midpoint or the center of the circle here. So all eyes were on me, faculty members in back of me, students in front of me. But I bring that up because we're going to be splicing in footage, actually, even in just a moment, to show you what it was like to teach an actual boot camp. And I was thinking to myself, I remember when we filmed it, God, I really wish that the students were being more animated. I wish we had selected, had gotten lucky and the kids would be volunteering a tremendous amount. And then I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of new instructors who are going to be listening and watching these training videos. And it's actually probably much better if we show them like a worst case scenario than a best case scenario. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to splice in, or more accurately, have our editor splice in a little bit of footage of me asking some students some warm-up questions, getting them to raise their hands. And what you'll see is it's not a very dynamic group, but it starts elevating the energy. And you'll see that I start, learning their names, and I'm bridging them to this quiz that's on this page here. How much do you know about the SAT in chapter 2? And you'll also see something in the footage. You'll see there's a little a clip in the footage where one of the classmates is a young lady who points to her friend who's sitting next to her, and clearly finds something really amusing in the book. And you'll see that a lot. Students really love our curriculum. If we've got a secret sauce, I think that's certainly it. There's a lot of things that have enabled us to be successful in a very saturated field. And I think certainly one of them is that we approach these exams in a unique manner, in a manner that is really diffuses anxiety, tries to be more creative and humorous and pop cultural, and students tend to really react well to that. So you'll see in this clip a young lady pointing something and smiling. Answers, and we'll do a little show of hands, and you guys can tell me if you think the answer is A, B, C, or D. This will be our first thing that I've noticed is I can sort of see the look on your faces, and students are like, well, I really want to ask a question, but I'm not going to because I don't want to be self-conscious, right? I don't want to feel as though I ask something that my peers might judge me by. So I would strongly encourage you, if you have any questions, to please, raise your hand, or you can just say I have a question, because I can assure you, if you have a question, there's if not 100% chance, there's probably a 99% chance that someone in this room has the identical question, and I'd rather you guys be the sort of courageous ones, if you will, and pose that question. And so I'm curious, just before we really dive in here, so I know I was talking to Emma when she got here, a tiny bit with Hunter. How many of you guys, by show of hands, are just started your senior year? How many of you guys? So it looks like most of you, and then junior year? Okay, so one junior, excellent, okay. So, so for those of you who are starting your senior year, is there anyone here for whom it's going to be your first time taking the SAT? Okay, excellent, thank you. Jack, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and again, I gotta do my best to remember all of your names. And are all of you guys who are taking it August 26th? Yes. Okay, cool, excellent. So, my goal for this weekend is to make sure that when you guys take this exam, you have a game plan in place for quite literally every single type of question that's on the SAT. And I'll tell you, most students don't know this. One question we always ask is, why are you guys even doing this? I don't even mean taking this class, but why are you even taking the SAT? Why is that a part of this rite of passage to get into college? And most students probably haven't never really occurred to them. So what we're going to start off by doing is we're going to, if you guys will flip with me in your books, and you should all have a book here. If you guys will go to page 17 for me, please. Before we start diving into strategies, we're going to actually spend just about 5 minutes talking about the genesis of the SAT and why you guys are sitting here in a room on a Saturday. So now that we are back from that clip, I want to walk you guys through this activity. Again, this is going to go from pages 21 through 34, and you'll see here it should take no more than 10 minutes, but really closer to 6 to 7 minutes. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Let me flip to the page here. So there's a couple ways that you can do this warm-up activity. The faster way to do it, and this is the way that I tend to do it, is to just give the students like literally 2 minutes to try each question either on their own or with a study buddy, like somebody who's sitting next to them, and they'll giggle throughout this and be pointing at things and they'll be amused, and that's fine. And then you can go over it together as a class. That's way number one. The other way to do it, which is more interactive but also takes more time, is to go question by question and have students, either volunteer answers or raise their hands. So you could say something like, all right, guys, we're going to dive in here. I'll read the first question out loud and see if you guys know what the answer is. So question number one, the very first SAT was administered on, and then you can say how many of you guys think A, B, C, D, and so forth, and students can raise their hands. But again, to me, I would, especially because pacing can be tricky the first time you teach, I would give students 2 minutes to read it and answer it. You can, by the way, set it up by saying, this is just a little bit of a warm-up quiz, a little pop quiz here to get you guys thinking about the SAT and why you're sitting in this room on a Saturday morning prepping for this exam and how long it's been around. And then afterwards, you can go over it. So when you're assuming you do it that way, what you'll do is you'll have them turn to page 24 after 2 minutes. You'll say, okay, guys, let's go over the answers here. If you'll flip with me to page 24. And again, if you've been to one of our live trainings, what you'll notice is we spend a lot of time encouraging all of you who are new instructors to give your students verbal cues regarding what page you're on. I promise you that the more dynamic you are as an instructor, the better you are, the more likely it is that your students will actually have no idea what page you're on because they're looking at you rather than the book, which is exactly what you want to have happen. So you always want to give them that cue. Just, hey guys, flip with me to page 24. You can hold the book up. You can use it as a prop, but you want to make sure that they're following along with you. By the way, and this will be one of the most important do's and don'ts for your training. Again, we've been doing these boot camps for now close to a decade. I started this company in 2006, and we've expanded from one location to several hundred throughout California, Texas, Eastern Seaboard, and now in the Midwest a little bit too. And part of the reason, I say that is I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and all of the boot camps have by and large gone really well. But occasionally we get two pieces of criticism, and here they are. Critique number one is that the bathrooms were locked. So remember when I said you want to get there at 8:30 in the morning? Part of that too is you want to make sure that the bathrooms are open. We always pay for facilities and custodial staff to be there and to open the bathrooms for your students. On the off chance, and I would say this happens about 1 out of every 10 or 12 classes, that your bathrooms are locked, you want to let your emergency contacts know right away so that we can reach out to the school on your behalf and get those bathrooms open. Because no matter how brilliant you are as a teacher, if you've got about 20 or 30 kids who have to go pee basically, and they're not able to, you're going to have a pretty unhappy bunch. Item number two, the other critique that we get is that the instructor was just reading straight out of the book. The instructor was just head down reading, and it wasn't worth it because my son or daughter could have just read from the book at home. And that's a valid critique. So I want to really encourage you guys that when you're teaching, don't read out of the book. Don't worry so much about getting the text verbatim. What you're doing is you're really paraphrasing. I want you to think about the purpose of each page. rather than the actual text that's on the page. Think about, what's the message that I want to convey? What's the point of this page? And as I said before, the point of some of the pages might literally be just to connect from one idea to another. It might just be a transition page. So the point of this page here is obviously just to review the first question and poke a little bit of good-natured fun at the SAT and how long it's been around. You can tell students that the SAT was invented way back in the 1920s by, as it says here, a Princeton University professor named Carl Brigham. There were 8,000 students, plus or minus, who took the inaugural SAT. Obviously, it's still around 91 years later, and you can tell students, if you'll check it out here, if you want to see some of the questions that the very first test takers had to contend with. So here we see, I'll read this one out loud. A mother is always blank than her daughter, and we have choices that are totally contemporary here. We have prettier, stouter, older, sensible, and more wrinkled. So we can get an idea of the culture of the times. And perhaps even more surprisingly here, you can see that these are some of the math questions. Does anyone want to read these? Okay, Jamie, why don't you read that one out loud? If a package containing 20 cigarettes costs 15 cents, how many cigarettes can be bought for 90 cents? Good, thank you. And here we have the next one. A man spent 1/8 of his spare change for a package of cigs, 3 times as much, by the way, don't say cigs, 3 times as much for a meal, and then he had 80 cents left. How much money did he have left? So as we can see here, you've got these questions that were on the 1926 SAT that were actually about tobacco, which is crazy. So the good news is that the SAT will not be giving you any tobacco-themed questions, but this is an exam that's been around since the 1920s and has been tormenting teenagers ever since. And if you guys will flip with me to page 26, so you'll see here what you notice is I didn't mention page 25. All I did is flip with me to page 26. So now here, we're going to discuss the organization that's responsible for actually writing the SAT. So as it says here on this page, all you're going to do is you're going to quickly paraphrase the underlined text. So a lot of this book, like this stuff here, this whole paragraph here, is meant for students if they want to read it on their own at home, right? This is not meant for you to read out loud. So when we say paraphrase just the underlined text is the most important for students to know. And the real point of this page, as it says up here, because again, we in this new edition of the teacher edition, what we're really striving to do is in addition to giving you timing and tips and techniques, to really get you thinking about, what is the purpose of this segment? What do I want to convey here? And you'll see, as it says here, pages 26 to 31 are mostly for laughs, but they serve an important secondary purpose to get your students to start thinking about the people who actually write the SAT. Because throughout the entire boot camp, what you're going to be doing is you're going to strive to get students to start thinking about the test writers, thinking about how they're trying to steer students toward incorrect answers. For example, on the reading portion of the boot camp, one element that you're going to return to over and over again is this idea of not getting really hung up on picking the correct answer, A, B, C, D, but trying to think of the best answer. Maybe it's the least worst answer. So if you plant the seed here during the introductory quiz about these individuals called psychometricians, and that's the real word for the people who actually write the SAT and standardized tests in general, if you start talking about them here, you can then refer back to them throughout the rest of the weekend. So you'll go on a little bit of a talk here, very brief, about psychometricians, who we like in this paragraph to Oompa Loompas in Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, but they're actually churning out annoying multiple choice questions instead of delicious chocolate candy bars. And here you'll have students go all the way to page 30 and 31, and we have a lot of illustrators and graphic designers, and we had a graphic designer who spent some time trying to do a 3D modeling of what we suppose exists at the Educational Testing Service, which still writes a portion of the SAT. The new College Board president, and I'm speaking to you guys, to gurus, not to our students here. This is too much information for them, but the new College Board president, David Coleman, actually seized control back of a lot of the SAT writing, and it's not an exam that is wholly written by the Educational Testing Service anymore, but its foundation is still at ETS. So here you can see that we had some fun kind of theorizing about what things may be lurking in the various quarters of ETS. Here on page 30, we have the evidence-based reading and writing wing, and on page 31, we have the math wing. And you might want to read a couple of these out loud. Here we have a little shout out to the OA. I don't know that any of your students will have watched it on Netflix, but basically these are very quick pages that are mostly for comic relief. From there, you're going to go to page 32 here. And, obviously the correct answer here is choice E, is none of the above. And what you want to do here is you want to give a short, this is a real fast page. And the goal with this page is to get students to understand that the SAT and ACT are overwhelmingly similar now. And you can even ask students, how many of you guys are planning to take both take the ACT too? Okay, how many of you guys have actually taken the ACT? You might spend 30 seconds asking students which one they found easier. But the bottom line is the new redesigned version of the SAT, which debuted in March of 2016, so about a year and a half ago as of the recording of this video, is incredibly similar to the SAT, and the ACT rather, and I would spin that as a positive because, prior to the new test, if you were a student and you wanted to take both exams, you would have to prep for each one because the strategies that might be advantageous on the ACT might be disadvantageous on the SAT. They used to be pretty dissimilar. Now, because they're quite similar, you can actually prep for one and get a big leg up on the other. And that's one of the key points that you want to make here. I would also emphasize, and this is also in the quiz, that there is no penalty for incorrect answers on either exam, which is, of course, here on this page, which is choice D. Thankfully, there is no penalty, okay? So this is a really, really fast page. You want to make sure that students understand that if they really, really don't know, they never want to leave any questions blank because there's no penalty for guessing. By the way, you should immediately thereafter say, but by the end of this weekend, hopefully you'll know how to do every single type of question that you're going to encounter. So you don't really have to worry about that because we don't want to set up this expectation that they're not going to learn a lot at the end of the weekend or by the end of the weekend, and therefore will have to be guessing. So rather than that, to preempt that response, you can just say, if you have to guess, you should feel comfortable doing so since there's no penalty. However, by the end of this weekend, hopefully you won't have to guess. You can just immediately go to the right answer. And by the way, you might start getting questions here, and it's okay to ask, to field questions. But if you start getting lots of questions about scoring, etc., remember, you can say, that's a great question. I'm going to try to get to that a little bit later. I just want to make sure that we are on schedule to wrap up all of these strategies by 1 p.m. So let's keep going, and I'll try to get back to that in just a little bit, just because you don't want to get too far afield. And then we have our final question here, question number 5. And this is really the most important of the 5 questions, as it says here in the teacher edition notes. So for this question here, you don't even have to really reveal the answer here is D. What you want to do is you want to say to students, let me ask you guys a question. What do we really mean? What do we really mean by cheating? What do we mean by that? And really what you want to do here is you want to get students to understand that what cheating really is knowing the questions that you're going to be asked in advance of the actual test. And from there, you can springboard off of that idea and say to them, truthfully, I might add, you can say to them, listen, the SAT and the ACT for that matter are really, really predictable exams. And even though they change the actual questions from test to test, so if I take the test in October, I'm obviously going to have a different set of questions than if I take the exam in November or December, etc., right? However, the types of questions remain constant. There's always the exact same types of questions. And what you'll discover the more you start familiarizing yourself with the SAT is that if you were to look at, let's say, an algebra question, a word problem from the October SAT, and compare that with an algebra word problem from the November SAT, what you would discover is that they're almost like siblings to each other. They're very, very close. They're almost like identical twins. They're not truly indistinguishable, but they are remarkably similar. So why is that good news? That's good news because what I'm going to be arming you guys with are go-to strategies for all the types of questions that you're going to encounter when you take the SAT, whether it's next weekend, a couple of weeks from now, or even a few months from now, you're going to be armed with go-to strategies. That way you never look at a problem and say, I don't even know where to begin. Okay, so that's my goal. And I want you guys, and here's the big soundbite that you have to hit. I want you guys to think of this book, and you can hold it up again as a prop. I want you to think of this book as a giant cheat sheet for all the types of questions that you're going to encounter on the actual SAT. And so now what I'm going to do is cut away and show you again this class that I taught in Texas, and you'll see me saying more or less that for about 90 seconds. Again, bearing in mind, this was not an easy class. These were kids who, I think largely because they had faculty members quite literally facing them, were a little bit on the more reserved side. But you'll see me doing that, and we're going to splice that in right now. A lot of what we're going to be doing this weekend is focusing not just on getting the right answer, but also I want you guys to start thinking almost as if you're the test makers yourselves. The SAT is written in my hometown, in Princeton, New Jersey. It's written at an organization called Educational Testing Service. The people who write this test, and I'm not making this word up, they're known as psychometricians. That is their actual title, italicizing the word psycho. And these people just sit in a room all day long, and they write test questions not just for the SAT, but the PSAT, all the AP tests, all the subject tests. Personally, I agree with your facial expression, absolutely. I would much rather do pretty much anything else the rest of my life than to do that, but that's their chosen path in life. No judgments, or actually extreme judgments, but we won't get into that. And so the bottom line is, what I want you guys to start thinking about is when these people craft multiple choice questions, it's not as if they give you one correct answer and then 3 answer choices that are blatantly incorrect. Their goal, and we're going to turn this and use this against them, is to give you 1 answer choice that's correct, and then 3 answer choices that appear almost correct, but it's almost as if they're the people who are lying to you. And that's the way we're going to start. We're going to start recognizing the types of trap answers that the SAT will give you. So bearing in mind, I want you guys to think of this book that you guys have almost like a giant cheat sheet for the entire SAT. Okay, so we're back here. So let's keep going. So after you have told them you've used a soundbite and you've talked about the fact that it's a giant cheat sheet, what you'll do, and really what you're doing here is you're paraphrasing, page 35 here. You're talking about, the goals for the weekend. You can also mention the fact that you're going to get students to recognize and avoid the sneaky trap answers. They tend to find that to be really compelling. So then you'll say, so just to really warm up here, if you guys will flip with me to page 36, I know that it is still pretty early here on a Saturday morning, and I promised not to inflict too much math at you until tomorrow, but just to really warm up our brains here, I'm going to give you guys about 20 seconds to try the problem on this page. So that's all you need to say there, and really what you're doing is you're giving students unbeknownst to them. You don't want to hint at this. You're giving students a problem that like 90% of students miss. And those of you who have taught before know that that's the case. Almost all students in your boot camp, for this problem here, when they do it on their own, silently for about 20 seconds, they're going to pick choice A. Why are they going to pick A? Because they'll say, okay, x squared equals 64, so x equals 8. Okay, y equals rad 64, so y equals 8. We want to know y minus x, so y is 8, x is 8, 8 minus 8 equals 0. Sweet, I'm done, choice A, right? What those students fail to take into account is that if x squared equals 64, then x doesn't equal just positive 8, it also equals negative 8. So therefore, x equals plus or minus 8. Now, some students, by the way, may ask you or may think, well, what about y? Doesn't y equal plus or minus 8? No. It's axiomatic in math that if you're taking the square root of something, it's only the positive value. But because x can equal plus or minus 8, that means I can have 8 minus 8, which equals 0, or I can have 8 minus a negative 8, which equals 16. Therefore, the correct answer is actually choice D. So again, the rhythm of this page, as it says here in the teacher edition, is without any way hinting that this is a tricky question, what you're going to do is you're going to say to students, okay, I'll give you about 20 seconds. Okay, how many of you guys think that the correct answer is A? And you're going to say that as though A were the correct answer. And you can even raise your hand, okay? So the majority of students in your room will raise their hands. And you can say, believe it or not, and you don't have to say how many of you think B, how many C. Well, actually, you can say how many of you think A. I can take that back. You actually should. You should say how many think A, raise your hand. A lot of kids' hands will go up. How many of you think B? Okay, none of you guys. How many think C? Okay, how many D? Okay, one or two of you guys. Believe it or not, the correct answer is in fact D. Okay, why did so many of you pick choice A? And then you can use the whiteboard to get into an explanation of, that x can equal plus or minus 8, therefore it is 16 or 0. And the real point of this page, first of all, it really grabs students' attention. Um, there's something about the fact that they get tricked that students almost like the fact that they were hoodwinked there. It's probably worth some sort of mini case study in teen psychology, but I can tell you from teaching a lot of these that students really do seem to um, like the fact that this problem was able to trick them. And then what you'll do is you'll say, okay, so, and by the way, we're gonna splice into this moment. You'll see that what I'm going to show you guys just a quick clip from the class that I taught in Texas, just asking students how many of you got A, how many B and C and D, and you'll see in that class there was one young lady who did, out of about 15 students, who did get choice D, but the rest of them did raise their hands for A, which is typical. How many of you guys by show of hands got A? Okay, most of you guys. How many B? C? Anyone D? Okay, one D. Believe it or not, correct answer here is D actually. Correct answer is D. So let's go over this problem here. Okay. So now that we're back, we're going to segue here, and the next thing you'll do is have students do page 37. So you'll say, as it says up here, so bearing in mind what we just discussed, the fact that x squared equals 64, therefore x equals plus or minus 8, I'm going to give you guys about 10 or 20 seconds now to try this problem on your own, and you'll give them about 10 or 20 seconds. They'll try this problem. Same thing. How many of you guys got A? Huh, none of you guys this time. Okay. How many of you got B? How many of you guys got C? How many of you guys got D? How many? Okay, so this time all of you got D. Huh, that's pretty interesting. So let me ask you guys a question here. And really what you're doing is you're really paraphrasing what's on this page here, on page 38. What you can say is, let me ask you guys a question. Did you guys suddenly get better at math between pages 36 and 37? Did all of a sudden, did you get much smarter? Did your IQs go up? No, that's obviously not what happened. What happened is you didn't get better at math. You got better at SAT math, okay? And that's our goal for this weekend. You learned how to crack a particular type of question, and of equal importance, you learned how to avoid picking a common type of trap answer. And then you applied that knowledge when you recognized a similar question here on page 37. So again, that's my goal for this weekend, to arm you guys with go-to strategies for not just zeroing in on the correct answers, but also for doing the problems in the most efficient manner, the most linear manner, and for avoiding those sneaky trap answers the SAT loves using in its questions in math and in language arts. Okay, so there's just one more thing that we all have to do here, and this is when you're going to transition to the final activity prior to the writing and language chapter, and this is the solemn oath. So, and in a moment, I'm going to show you guys a clip of my doing this with a group of students, and you'll see that they do get into it. In there, again, it's sort of the energy level in the class was a little bit dialed down. I think, again, in large part because their teachers were watching them and their principal, and for that matter, watching me. But you'll see that they do get into it. You can see that some of them are smiling and laughing and having a good time with it. And it really does energize the room. And the rhythm for this is you can say, so before we dive in here and we start learning strategies for all the types of questions, today we're going to do writing and language and reading. Tomorrow we're going to do math and the optional essay. Before we do all that, I want you guys to repeat after me. We're going to take a pledge together, and we're going to vow our commitment to outsmarting, as it says here, the diabolical test known as the SAT. And this is a call and response activity. So you're going to say I, and then you're going to pause, and your students will say I in unison, and then you'll say the teenage American sitting in this class right now, and then they'll say the teenage American sitting in this class right now, and so forth and so on, all the way until the end here on page 40. And I promise you again, this is something that we put in, 5 years ago at this point. It was almost an afterthought. It was something we thought, I don't know if this is going to be corny or cheesy, and kids love this. It buoys the mood in the room. Students get really into it. They start laughing. And that's the exact energy that you want at around 9:15 in the morning on a Saturday. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little pledge together, okay? And this is going to be our firm commitment to, as it says here, outsmarting the diabolical test known as the SAT, which again has been tormenting students since 1926. So I'm going to say a line, and I'd like you guys to enthusiastically say the line after me, all right? So I, the teenage American sitting in this class right now, I'm going to learn all about the SAT this weekend. And even though there are a lot of other things I'd rather be doing right now, like going to the movies, or hanging out at my friend Jason's house. His parents are out now. Or basically doing anything that doesn't involve the SAT. I'm going to pay attention because I want to get a high score and be really smart and funny and charming SAT person teaching this class this weekend. Probably has a lot of good strategies for raising my score. Okay, thank you guys. So with that, you're going to dive into chapter 3, and I'm going to end this video here. You'll have a clip again of my doing the oath for in front of a group of students at San Marcos Academy in Texas. You can check that out. And then in the next video, I will be explaining how to walk students through chapter 3, which is the writing and language portion of the SAT bootcamp.